Item 6 is here from Somervell County President District Chief Appraiser Wes Rollins regarding options for the hospital district's tax rate. Wes, you got the floor.
Real quick. Wasn't sure how many people were here too. I'll take one personal, as many as we got there. Basically, the 26.042B of the property tax code gives the hospital board the ability in the year preceding a natural disaster, which was declared by the governor, which happened last year when Governor Abbott declared our wildfire a natural disaster, the ability to take their tax rate up as high as needed in order to basically offset any incurred costs that you guys were not anticipating during the fire. And it also doesn't set a limit on how much that number is. It indicates to you that you may use the money in the event that something else has happened, like maybe you realized during the fire that you needed more X or Y. So the first handout there that I gave you is just a copy that shows where that is in the tax code and what it does for you. And then after talking with Michael about the possibility of using this, I created just a grid that is going to give you an idea of what different things do with your tax rate, how it impacts the general public, and then how it impacts the hospital district as a whole. I want to start in the bottom section of that first. Basically, the bottom section just indicates how it impacts the hospital district itself. The line that says certified value for 2023, the $3,965,000 number indicates what our certified total was to the hospital this year. That's your taxable amount, and that's how you're going to be able to establish what your revenue comes in on. And then the number out to the right of that is how much revenue at various different tax rates that's going to generate. The first number on the top of the page indicates your no new revenue rate, which is basically the hold the value exactly the same as it was the prior year. Your no new revenue rate is just slightly above 11 cents, so it would be reducing your tax rate substantially from where it was the prior year. And it would produce the same amount of money, the $4.2 million that you received last year on those taxes. If you maintain the exact same rate, the 2022 tax rate, and just applied it to the new number, the second column shows that it increases your revenue by $1.5 million, and it increases your revenue total up to $5.8 million. And then each increment after that, I did 16 cents. If you went up an additional penny and a little bit, basically that would give you a revenue of $6,344,000 and an increase of $2 million in revenue. And then at 17.5 cents or 17.49 cents, it increases your revenue to $6.9 million and an increase of 2.638. So by going above your no new revenue rate, every penny you do basically is going to produce roughly $500,000, give or take a little. And you're going to be able to add that into whatever you guys do with your tax rate that will go into your budget. I wanted to also demonstrate to you what it's going to do for taxpayers. Overall, the county this year, the tax rates are going down substantially. Some of that is because of the new legislation that passed. It created a new exemption for the school district on homesteads. It also forced compression on the school district's tax rate, and that forced compression is resulting in their tax rate dropping nearly 20 cents. So your school district tax rate, as it stands right now, is going to drop basically 17 or 18.5 cents from where it was last year, on top of getting the additional $60,000 homestead exemption. So for everybody who has a house or a business, there's going to be substantial relief in taxes coming. On top of that, the county, as it is proposed right right now is proposing a reduction in their rate of 4.7 cents or almost a nickel. Glen Rose City is proposing about a 3-cent drop in their rate based on, again, the figures that are provided by no new revenue. The Water District is proposing an increase of about a penny in their rate, and depending on what the hospital does will depend on where this number ends up. But right now, we're anticipating that at last year's numbers, your new taxes would be roughly down about $900 is what we're anticipating as it stands right now. If your average homestead price was $277,000, you take out your exemptions that are allowable by law, you're going to see a reduction from last year's to this year's of roughly $900. And then it's going to go up or down based on you guys' rate. So.
I have a question.
Sure.
It's a little bit off the subject, but I'm curious, how is the school district expected to operate with a reduction in the amount of money that they're paying in?
That'd be a question for Trig, but it's going to be complicated. We actually had a discussion on it Friday. The problem they run into is the school district does some things that a lot of other school districts don't do. One of those things is they give a huge 20% local option exemption that all the other districts give, which they're going to be penalized for this year, because the way the new law was written, by giving the increase in your homestead exemption straight across the board, it's taking money out of the school finance formula for the folks who are already giving the 20% local option. It's going to create probably a budget shortfall for the school. And there's not a real good way to offset it, because if they go up on the rate, because of recapture, they don't really get a dollar for dollar match. They only get basically a small fraction of that, about a 10% match. So if they went up, 10 cents on their tax rate, they only get to keep about a penny of that 10 cents at the end of the day.
So basically, all the school districts in Texas are dealing with this somewhat similar issue?
Well, only the rich school districts. The poor school districts, because they're not subject to recapture, which is the vast majority of the school districts in the state, this doesn't impact. It actually positively impacts all of those. So they won't have to deal with the same issue.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Anything else? I guess the only question is, how do we get across to the taxpayers that we're not going to gouge them? Because I think that's the, thing that they're going to
Yeah, I mean,
feel like it's happening.
clearly, I think there is always a sense, anytime you go up on your tax rate, that you're somehow, taking more money that you're not entitled to, basically. The two things about this particular way of going up on your tax rate is, one, there's really no penalty for you guys doing it. There's no way to roll back the rate. There's not an issue as far as what happens if the taxpayer doesn't like the rate. Generally, you guys get penalized if the taxpayer doesn't agree with your opinion of what the rate should be. There's generally a rollback election, and then it can be forced to a lower number. In this instance, it takes that method completely out of the realm of believability. The other part of this is going to be the first time in a long time that rates are substantially going down and that taxes are substantially going down. And if you look at what the average homestead paid last year in hospital district taxes, it was $324. If you went to the maximum, which is the 17.49 increase there, it's only going up essentially an additional $60 over last year, but they're still going to get a $900 reduction in their overall tax bill. So the $60 is pretty inconsequential when you really look at it from that standpoint. And that would be the selling point, is that it produces a ton of new revenue for the hospital. It's a one-time thing. It can only happen this 1 year. Next year, it's going to all go back to the way it was. So you're going to be back down to your new revenue rate or your voter approval rate. So it's going to immediately drop. There's no penalty for the taxpayer really, other than
gonna see something less than 900.
Clearly, if you're a home that was increasing from last year to this year, then yeah, absolutely, you'll get less of a reduction in that scenario. If you're over 65, your taxes are frozen anyway, so there's very little movement there that's gonna transpire. If anything, we're gonna see a small reduction for folks over 65 this year. You're gonna see a bigger reduction next year, though, if you're over 65. The legislature, they made some corrections in the formula as to how we're gonna do the tax calculation from one year to the next for folks over 65 to make sure they do get some of the relief that was given. It's just a really complicated formula they came up with, and they staged it. We're actually doing, the reduction you're gonna see this year actually was passed 2 years ago, and it's just now getting implemented. The reduction you see next year on your tax bill would be what's coming from this past session. So it's gonna be coming for even folks over 65, it's just gonna be slower to get there for you.
But the deduction in tax is only for people who are homesteaded, right?
That is true, it's
So
only fair.
I don't know what the population is in Somerville County,
Mhm.
the mix of homesteaded versus not homesteaded. Do you know?
Out of about 5,000 homes, about 3,500 of them have homesteads. So there's about 1,500 homes that don't have a homestead exemption on them. That's correct.
Okay.
And then businesses clearly wouldn't have a homestead. But those folks are also gonna see some level of reduction just in the rate itself. I mean, you're looking at seeing an overall reduction in tax rate. Even if you guys increase to the max, you'd be still looking at seeing an overall reduction in the tax rate of over 20 cents right now. So somewhere between 21 to 26 cents, depending on where everybody ends on their rates. So, I mean, everybody's gonna see some reduction in their tax bill. Most of our businesses didn't get increased this year in value, so they're gonna see 100% of the increase in the rate itself. So every one of those is gonna be positively impacted by it.
Anything else?
Is there any burden of proof that the hospital has to provide to show how they were negatively impacted by these fires, or this is just an opportunity to get some revenue and?
There's really, I mean, this thing was written incredibly vague. It's very specific in the fact that it says that you can't basically have an election, that a taxpayer can't force you to an election. But it's very, very vague after that. It doesn't give you any requirement for proof, it doesn't give you a requirement for notice, it doesn't give you a requirement for any of the things we typically have to do. And it's kind of unusual. And quite frankly, there's very few situations this is actually going to be used in. This is one of the, we're so unique because of our power plant and because of the amount of tax revenue our power plant burdens, that there's probably 5 places in the entire state that could even make this scenario work for them in a positive manner. Most every place else in the state, this is a negative thing when you do it. The reason we're unique, though, is this particular year, we went up over $1 billion on our power plant value. It's almost unheard of anywhere to see a $1 billion jump in your tax base, which equates for us to about a 25% jump in our tax base. So, that doesn't hardly ever happen. Then on top of that, you've got a scenario that's playing out where the legislature has come in and drastically reduced the school district's taxes. That is not gonna happen on any given year. It just, again, everything kind of lines up to where when you do it here, this year, if you choose to do it, it's basically being covered up by all the other good things that happened this year. There's not a real good way for this thing to look bad because there's so many good things happening. And again, it's a scenario where if you guys take this opportunity, you're gonna be able to use this revenue, for the hospital district and for, it's a cheap investment for our taxpayers, honestly.
So if we vote for an increase to 0.1749%, what happens happens next year, we have to roll back to 0.14?
You would get, no, you would actually go back to whatever the new voter approval rate is, which could be as low as about 12 cents a million.
Right now, I think we're 10 and 11 for no taxes.
Yeah. So it's gonna go back regardless, whether you do it this year or whether you do it next year, you know, whether you just naturally go ahead and go to your no new revenue rate or your voter approval rate this year, it's gonna come down drastically. It can either come down now or it can come down next year. But it's coming down.
Do you anticipate the owners of the plant disputing this $1 billion increase in value?
I do not. They've already missed their opportunity for the year. Not only that, they've also agreed to it. We have a settlement statement in place on that. And, I mean, without speaking to future values, there's a real good possibility we're gonna see another large increase in this value next year. Maybe not to the tune of $1 billion, but countywide, my guess is our overall number goes up another 500 to 750 million for next year.
Could I safely say that they recognize the value of this plant is substantially higher than it's been appraised?
Yes,
They figured that out.
There is a reason they figured that out. They didn't just come to that conclusion on their own. The South Texas plant sold this year, and the South Texas plant is so closely related to our plant that that sale had a huge bearing on what the number of our plant should be at. So by it selling, it indicated what market value should be. It's the first time we've had that kind of opportunity in years to actually see a sale that closely related to our power plant. So I anticipate, like I said, the number that we have currently is going to go up again. And I don't think they're going to argue it next year either. You know, barring something happening with that sale. If the sale got thrown out, which is still going through the process of the PUC and the Nuclear Energy Commission and a couple other steps it's got to get through. But if it completes, which everybody anticipates it will, I don't think that we'll
Is
see
the
this.
age of that South Texas plant
Very
about the
similar,
same?
very similar,
Okay.
almost identical.
Yeah, they came online pretty close.
Yeah, each generator actually kind of came on stage. One came on here, one came on there, two came on here, two came on there. So it's a very, very closely related. And size-wise, they're also very closely related. Theirs is slightly bigger, but we're talking like 100 megawatts difference.
Good.
Very informative, thank you.
Is that it?
Thank you, sir.
Okay, I'm gonna step out. I appreciate